And we're back with our two experts here in the studio, Dr. Bong Young-shik and Arirang's very own Kim Minji. Let's start with the very end of the summit. That was President Moon coming back and giving a press briefing in Seoul at the end of the day, telling the world and the South Korean people about what he did there in the north. What struck me about the whole thing really was how quickly the topic of the United States came up. President Moon mentioned it in his remarks about what he had discussed. You know, it was a topic that obviously, for obvious reasons, was not brought up in public while President Moon was in North Korea. So it was the first chance for him to talk about it and for reporters to hear about it.
Well, the United States was an elephant in the room. When President Moon Jae-in was having meetings with the chairman Kim Jongun of North Korea, it was apparent that there was a third leader in the room, which was the U.S. President Donald Trump. So whatever agreement or disagreement they might have had between themselves, it was not unrelated to the likely response from Washington. Every inter-Korean agreements should be in parallel with the U.S. blueprint to bring sustainable peace on the Korean Peninsula, but at the same time achieving final and fully verified denuclearization of North Korea. So although the magic word, the United States, was not really mentioned while President Moon Jae-in was physically inside North Korea, but that was a magic word that both leaders must have kept in their heads all the time.
For sure. And in respect to what President Moon said about the United States, even today there were certain areas that he could not talk about in this address. But he did say that South and North Korea have the same idea about ending the war, but North Korea and the United States is another question entirely.
Right, but Moon Jae-in made it really clear that the issue should be dealt between North Korea and the United States as well. Ending the war officially and permanently on the Korean Peninsula since the signing of the Armistice Agreement to suspend the Korean War, not officially ended the Korean War on the 27th of July 1953. Is not only a business between the two Koreas, but also something that must be struck between the United States and North Korea as still former and current present adversaries. So, but as National Security Advisor in the President's office, Mr. Jongun, and President Moon Jae-in himself reiterated that there's a lot of very important substances left out of the letter of the joint statement issued in Pyongyang this time. So the basic message that President Moon Jae-in was delivering to the reporters gathered in the press center today after his return from North Korea is that very first dramatic first season of this opera.
Okay.
And stay tuned. There will be season 2. But this time the main protagonist do not include me. It'll be Mr. Kim and Mr. Trump.
Very interesting. Let's get back to season 2 of that drama in just a second. Minji, we were talking earlier, the idea of how the peace process goes forward and when the Korean War can be formally declared over, in contrast with what can be done between the two Koreas themselves.
So they've said that they want to declare an end to a war as soon as possible, and that's probably possible. They want to achieve it before the year's end. And there has been some, he said there has been some miscommunication over the term itself. He addressed it today at the presser and saying that the concept that we refer to when we declare the end of war is more of like a political declaration and ending it. And when it comes to signing a peace treaty, that would only happen when North Korea achieves complete denuclearization.
So that's still relatively far out there into the future if it does happen. He also mentioned, President Moon mentioned the U.S. military presence in South Korea. That's something he doesn't think is relevant to what's going on now.
Yes, he did note that many in South Korea and the U.S. fear that the move, by declaring an end of a war, it may weaken the South Korea and the U.S. alliance because we are keeping tens of thousands of U.S. troops in South Korea. But he did reassure that it's more of a political declaration, like I said, and it's the first step to ending the hostile relationship and providing security guarantees, and that it won't involve the signing of a peace treaty. Right at the moment.
Because South Korea, the Republic of Korea, is allies with the United States, irrespective of other factors, it's for security. Got
That's
it.
Right.
Well, making a distinction there, talking about the United States, again, a reporter asked President Moon, noted that there must be differences between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, and President Moon knows what they are.
No, there's no daylight between the two allies. That's the official rhetoric from both sides.
I'm sorry, not between the allies, but between that President Moon, being the interlocutor between these two, would know what the issues are.
President Trump tweeted, and as you saw on the TV report, that he praised the summit meeting and its outcomes. And he emphasized that his meeting with Mr. Kim Jong-un in Singapore on June 12th is very successful despite the domestic criticisms. He emphasized that there has not been further missile tests or nuclear tests by North Korea. So we are free from the terror of North Korea's provocation. The nation is safe. And our war heroes, their remains are coming back in the meantime. And North Korea has pledged to possible, expert inspections on the Dongchangri site, dismantlement. So according to Trump's own vision, that things are moving in the right direction, albeit a little slower than anticipated. So he would like to package everything in a very positive and successful light for his own political interest.
Sure.
But at the same time, he is also very well aware that North Korea's promises of complete denuclearization has not been carried out as fast as he thought North Koreans promised at the Singaporean summit meeting, which led to his decision to stop his Secretary of State, Mr. Mike Pompeo, to make another visit to Pyongyang, which really delayed the original schedule espoused by Pyongyang and Seoul. That, okay, we are going to have Secretary Pompeo's visit to Pyongyang, and we will get the major concessions from the United States. And taking advantage of that, we will have a very successful third summit meeting between Moon and Kim, in which we are going to declare that we will resume and start many of the old and new economic cooperation projects. And at the United Nations General Assembly meeting, with the possible participation of Mr. Kim Jong-un, then we will jointly declare the official end of the Korean War.
Yeah.
That was the original schedule, but it was stopped by a decision by U.S. President Donald Trump. So it is very necessary for Pyongyang and Seoul to resuscitate the momentum of dialogue and engagement between the United States and North Korea. So in that regard, that the summit meeting between the two Korean leaders this time actually served their purpose, tossed the ball to the United States and North Korea to have another high-level meetings. So we have to stay tuned and see what's going to happen.
Yeah, and we haven't heard yet from President Trump. I just checked; he didn't tweet about this yet, but it's morning in the United States on Thursday.
No, he did about the summit meeting that.
He did. I mean,
Right.
he hasn't tweeted today.
Oh, yeah.
About it. So we'll see if he does. The
Well,
U.S. will be reacting
actually,
to it.
you brought up a very important point. In the eyes of North Koreans, and to a certain extent, in the eyes of South Koreans, it seems like the President Trump is totally obsessed with the success of the agreements forged in the Singapore summit meeting on June 12th. But the reality is that North Korean issue is one of so many issues that a president of the United States has to pay attention to and make important decision about. So it is a very important issue, pressing issue, but at the same time, it is not the only issue or the most urgent priority for the Donald Trump presidency. So one mistake, a misunderstanding that North Koreans must have made, in my personal opinion, is that they overestimate the potential preoccupation of President Trump with the outcome winning the midterm election in the first week of November in the United States. And it's a North Korean issue's relevance to the election result.
Sure.
The midterm election is very important for the Republican Party and the Trump presidency, but making a huge success out of this negotiations with nuclear North Korea will not really fundamentally shift the result in favor of the Republican Party or Trump presidency. So I think it was a strategic misunderstanding by the Kim Jong-un government, especially that of Mr. Kim Young-chul, the point man engaging in negotiation with his counterpart, Secretary Pompeo, that North Korea could afford to push the United States to the corner because the United States could not push back because they are preoccupied with, delineating a very visible success in negotiation with North Korea in order to use it in order to enhance the party's chance to win the midterm election.
When in reality, it's not really an issue that there's a
There's
huge
no
dividing
correlation.
line on.
There's
the
no
United
strong
States, right.
correlation as strong as North Koreans assumed. Good example is the appointment of Mr. Stephen Biegun as the special representative to North Korea. Now, the communication channel between North Korea and the United States, which used to be Mr. Kim Young-chul, the Vice President of the Korean Workers' Party, and the Secretary of State of the United States. But now the North Korean affairs will be mainly handled by special representative to North Korea.
Indeed.
So North Korean have to restore the level of line of communication to the level of the Secretary of State.
That'll be important to them. And they will have a chance to do that possibly next week in New York.
Right. But it is very indicative that Mike Pompeo announced that he would like to meet Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho in the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly meeting. But at the same time, he did not forget to mention that there will be official negotiation to take place in Vienna. And probably Ms. Choi Sung-hee, representing the Foreign Ministry of North Korea, and Mr. Stephen Biegun, the special representative to North Korea.
Another thing to watch. Now, when President Moon meets Donald Trump, they will have a lot of things to talk about, things that only President Moon can really tell President Trump. There's nothing else they could say publicly yet.
There was a line of defense and response, right, to the criticism inside South Korea and outside that the Pyongyang declaration is conspicuously lacking in terms of a clear, demonstration of will and intention and specific timetable by North Korean leadership about denuclearization. And President's Office National Security Advisor, Mr. Chung Eui-yong, and President Moon Jae-in himself emphasized that there is a lot of important substance that could not be contained in the actual letter of the Pyongyang declaration. So as I said, that stay tuned. There will be more dramas coming, and you don't want to miss those dramas. But
Absolutely
we have to
not.
wait and see.
Yeah, we do have to wait to see. Several things on the calendar coming up. We talked about earlier the possibility of Kim Jong-un coming to South Korea, which would be historic. No North Korean leader has ever been to South Korea. If that happens, it could happen this year, according to President Moon, but in any case, Kim Jong-un said he would try to come as soon as he can. What would that be like?
So like you said, if it's carried out, it would be the first time that the North's leader has set foot in the South Korean capital since the division of the Korean Peninsula. And it's something that we probably couldn't have ever thought of last year when we were actually on the verge of war. All inter-Korean summits so far have either taken place in Pyongyang or at the border village of Panmunjom like we saw in April. But we must note that Kim is not the first Korean leader to agree to come to Seoul, however. His father, late leader Kim Jong-il, also agreed to visit the South when he held his first ever inter-Korean summit with then South Korean President Kim Dae-jung back in 2000. But they said they are planning to make a visit this sometime soon, and it could take place this year. So today, after visiting Baekdusan Mountain, they said something on the itinerary could be visiting Hallasan, which is in South Korea's southern island of Jeju-do.
Wow, yeah, that would be sort of an obvious first choice, right? You go to the northernmost point in the peninsula and go to the southernmost point of South Korea. Imagine that, December on Mount Hallasan with the snow on the top of the mountain.
Well, there's a controversy or debate. I would say that whether Kim Jong-un can actually or will actually come to Seoul.
Is that right?
Before the end of this year, right? Think about the commotion or demonstration of deep division according to your ideologies when U.S. President Donald Trump was visiting Seoul.
That's right. We had anti-protests.
Right. I mean, the anti-protest or pro-demonstration times 1,000 will be expected if the leader of North Korea is actually present in the capital city of South Korea. There are three things that has a very specific date that are supposed to happen before the end of this year, calendar year of 2018. One is the official declaration of the end of the Korean War, right?
Yep.
Argued by both Korean governments. And the other case which nominates end of the calendar year 2018 as a specific date is the words of White House National Security Advisor Mr. John Bolton that North Koreans promised, we heard this from South Korean government, that they will either destroy or transfer 60 to 70% of all nuclear warheads, materials, and missile parts out of the country by the end of this year, 2018.
Now, has that comment been picked up, though, by other prominent United States officials?
Oh, definitely, right.
Yeah.
And the third announcement, which has a very specific date, which is the end of the calendar year 2018, happens to be President Moon Jae-in's word that, barring unexpected major obstacles coming, I invited Mr. Kim Jong-un to make a visit to Seoul before the end of the year 2018. Three things are supposed to happen before the end of this year. So we will keep watching whether all three things will happen, because these three things are not separate from each other. North Korea's willingness to move really fast and fundamentally with regards to its pledge of denuclearization is closely tied to U.S. willingness to accept North Korea's demand for official declaration of the end of the Korean War before the end of this year.
Yeah.
And
sure.
if that happens, or that's going to happen, then all these potentially hostile elements for Mr. Kim Jong-un to be in Seoul as a leader of North Korea will be smoothed out. If Kim Jong-un is going to come to Seoul, potentially also with U.S. President and President of China, and South Korean President will be the host, for the ceremony to declare official end of the Korean War, to declare that war is finally and fundamentally over on the Korean Peninsula, to take place in Seoul. Who can throw eggs and stones to Mr. Kim Jong-un?
Right. So for that scenario to play out, multiple things have to happen simultaneously.
Right.
in the process.
I agree. We're talking about extremely compressed calendar.
Compressed, it definitely sounds
That
compressed.
is why President Moon Jae-in said a few weeks ago that we have to rush, we have to speed up to create what he called irreversible peace on the Korean Peninsula. He really wants to lock everything before their momentum will be lost.
Momentum may be restored today, may be restored, but you know, as you illustrated in the point before, a few things derailed the original schedule that we had laid out for this year already.
Right. President Trump made it really clear to both Korean governments that you are not supposed to write the script without my consent. I will be at the center of the decision making to decide whether all these things will actually take place before the end of this year. As shown by his decision to stop Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to make visit to North Korea without any discernible gains coming out of another meeting with North Korean officials.
Indeed. Well, we're finally talking about the United States in the picture now after a few days. And as you said, it was the elephant in the room throughout this summit. But we cannot discount the achievements of the two Koreas over the past few days. We can look at agreements to make a peace zone, for example, along the demilitarized zone. A peace zone in the West Sea is another one, and to pull back some of the drills. Right, Minji, what can we say about what the two Koreas themselves have achieved?
That's right. So the two Koreas actually had a separate military agreement where it called for completely ceasing all hostile acts in every domain, including land, air, and sea. And these include designating no-fly zones for aircrafts above the military demarcation line, taking measures to prevent any accidental military clashes, as well as solving all military issues through peaceful consultations. And they said they will continue talks on various levels in order to achieve this. Others also include transforming the DMZ into a peace zone by removing guard posts within 1 kilometer of within each other and demilitarizing the joint security area. So some experts have said that this is almost close to declaring an end of a war because we've agreed to end the hostilities in that area.
It certainly sounds like progress towards the end of hostilities. And that's another one with deadlines on it. This work is supposed to start soon.
That's right. So some measures are going to start within November or October. So we have a timeline for these as well. So they are going to first implement some of the measures and gradually expand on them.
Again, it's agreements made by two Koreans. So
Exactly.
Koreans like to, take actions fast and move really fast. So, but as President Moon Jae-in himself emphasized in his question and answer period with the reporters, I think this part, the military tension reduction measures, as a part of the Pyongyang Declaration, I think this is the most, biggest achievement coming out of this third summit meeting between President Moon Jae-in and Mr. Kim Jong-un, although the focus was on denuclearization and the improvement of the inter-Korean relations. Why? This is pragmatic. Regardless of the progress or lack thereof, denuclearization talks between North Korea and the United States. This will help reduce the tension on the Korean Peninsula between the two armed forces of North Korea and South Korea. So South Korea will not just stay idle while waiting for good news coming from the negotiation between Washington and North Korea. You got to start from doing something that is under your control. Two, it will alleviate the security concern of North Korea and will give strong and additional incentives for North Korean leadership to actively consider further steps toward the denuclearization. Why? Because North Koreans have used the hostile policy of the United States and South Korea as an excuse to maintain nuclear weapons and missiles as a self-defense mechanisms. But if we succeed in reducing military tension across the DMZ, demilitarized zone, then North Koreans will have a weaker ground to maintain the same line of defense to justify their maintenance of weapons of mass destruction.
So South Korea is doing what it can do in
Right.
the present situation, and that is not disconnected from everything else.
Right. And at the same time, I'd like to point out, especially to people who said that South Korea yielded too much to North Korea and fell into the trap set by North Koreans. But I think differently because, for instance, the decision to remove the 11 GPs as a sign to reduce tension is a lopsided victory for North Korea because North Koreans have approximately 160 GPs in comparison with 60 GPs held by South Korean armed forces.
That was the big sort of debate, is on what proportionality do you go
Right.
with in reducing them.
But for at this time, at least for this first try to reduce tension and to probe each other's true intention for to reduction of military tension, you can't really maintain everything should be absolutely done proportionally or in the same number. Because why 11 GPs as a first step? Because these 11 GPs are closest to each other. So they have the highest chance of the accidental conflicts because the distance between the GPs of the North Korea and the South Korea is only 1 kilometer. So this is a very effective and necessary probing mechanisms to see whether North Koreans are serious about moving toward peace.